Sabrina Cross snatched the microphone and pointed directly at Olivia's pregnant belly in front of 400 people and laughed. "Look at her. She really came." Her voice rang across the entire ballroom. "Honey, you're not his wife tonight. You're just the woman carrying his insurance policy." The crowd froze. Cameras turned. Olivia stood completely still, one hand pressed against her 7-month belly, waiting for her husband to speak. Ryan Sterling, billionaire founder, the most powerful man in that room, looked straight at his pregnant wife and said absolutely nothing. He looked away. Drop your city in the comments. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what those three brothers did next changed everything. The night was supposed to be Ryan's night. That was the thing Olivia kept reminding herself as she stepped out of the black SUV in front of the Grand Hyatt Regency in downtown Dallas. The valet barely looked at her. The photographers were clustered near the entrance cameras, already lifted and aimed at the red carpet, but they weren't waiting for her. They were waiting for Ryan. They were always waiting for Ryan. She smoothed the front of her navy gown, the one she'd spent 3 weeks searching for, the one designed specifically to make a 7-month pregnant woman feel like she still belonged in a room full of people who wore $10,000 suits as if they were pajamas, and she told herself to breathe. It wasn't vanity that made her care about how she looked tonight. It was something quieter and more desperate than that. She just wanted to feel like she still existed inside this life she had built alongside her husband. She wanted to walk into that room and have Ryan look across the crowd and find her first the way he used to. She hadn't told him she was coming. She'd planned to surprise him. She had this small private hope, the kind she rarely admitted even to herself anymore, that he would see her across the ballroom, and his whole face would soften the way it did in the early years, back when she was still the person he told everything to. She pushed through the glass doors. The lobby of the Grand Hyatt was transformed. Sterling Aerospace had spent what the press later estimated to be $2 million on the event alone. There were aviation models suspended from the ceiling, sleek and white, and impossibly beautiful, rotating slowly under a constellation of gold lights. There were investors from 3 countries. There were senators. There were celebrities whose faces Olivia recognized from magazine covers. There were cameras everywhere. Broadcast cameras, not just phone cameras, because Ryan had made sure the launch of the SkyNova personal aviation project would be an event the entire industry would talk about for years. Olivia was proud of him, even now, even standing on the edge of that magnificent room feeling slightly invisible. She was proud of the man he'd built himself into. She remembered the early days when the company was running on fumes and prayer, when Ryan would come home past midnight smelling like jet fuel and coffee, and she would sit with him at their kitchen table while he spread blueprints across the surface and talked for hours about what this company was going to become. She had believed in him before anyone else had. She needed to remember that tonight. She spotted him near the main stage, surrounded by the cluster of men who always surrounded him at these events, executives and investors, and people who needed something from him. He was wearing the charcoal suit she'd picked out with him last month. He looked confident. He looked successful. He looked completely in his element. He hadn't seen her yet. And standing just to his left, close enough that her shoulder occasionally brushed his arm, was Sabrina Cross. Olivia had met Sabrina twice before. Both times had been at company functions. Both times Sabrina had been introduced as a strategic communications consultant, the kind of vague, elegant title that meant something and nothing at the same time. She was beautiful in the way that certain women are deliberately and professionally beautiful, every detail calculated, every gesture practiced. She had dark hair that fell in a perfect sweep over one shoulder and wore a red dress so precisely fitted that it seemed engineered rather than sewn. Olivia watched Sabrina lean toward Ryan and say something that made him laugh. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not quite jealousy, something older and sadder than jealousy, something closer to grief. She told herself to stop it. She told herself she was being irrational. She told herself that Ryan was a man surrounded by beautiful, ambitious people all day long, and that meant nothing. She told herself a lot of things as she crossed the room toward her husband. Ryan. He turned. For one fraction of a second, she caught it. She always caught things like this because she'd spent years paying close attention to her husband's face. There was something that crossed his expression. Not happiness, not the warm surprise she'd hoped for. Something more like discomfort gone so fast she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Then he smiled. "Olivia, you came." He kissed her cheek. "I didn't know you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," she said. "I know how important tonight is. You should be home resting." "I'm pregnant, not ill," she said, and kept her voice light, kept the smile in place. "I wanted to be here with you." Sabrina turned towards her then, and Olivia watched the woman look her over a single sweep from head to toe, so fast it would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. And then Sabrina smiled. That smile, the kind that reaches the lips and nowhere near the eyes. "Olivia," Sabrina said warmly, "you look radiant. How far along are you now?" 7 months, Olivia said. 7 months. Goodness, you're so brave coming out to an event like this. A pause. Just a beat too long. "I hope you're not exhausted." "I'm fine," Olivia said. "Thank you." Ryan was already being pulled back into conversation by a man in a gray suit with a senatorial handshake. He went easily naturally the way water flows toward the lowest point, without looking back at her. Olivia stood there for a moment. Then she smiled at no one in particular and went to find the bar for a sparkling water. The evening moved, the way these evenings always moved, in a slow, glittering tide of handshakes and canapes and conversations that sounded important even when they were completely empty. Olivia circulated. She talked to people she recognized. She answered questions about her due date with the patient grace of a woman who'd answered that same question 400 times this month. She was good at this. She'd spent years learning how to be good at this. But she kept noticing Sabrina. The woman moved through the room like she owned something in it. Not just confidence, something more territorial than that. She touched Ryan's arm twice in the span of an hour. She laughed at things he said in the particular way that signals not just amusement, but possession. She leaned in to whisper in his ear during a presentation, and Ryan did not step back. Olivia set down her glass of sparkling water. She breathed through her nose. She kept her face composed. The formal program began at 9. Ryan took the stage to thunderous applause and delivered the kind of speech that reminded Olivia exactly why she'd fallen in love with him. Passionate, smart, full of a vision that could genuinely change the way human beings move through the world. She stood near the back of the crowd and watched him and felt something complicated move through her. Love and pain so tangled together she couldn't separate them anymore. When the speech finished and the applause rose and the evening shifted into its next phase of celebration, Olivia was making her way toward the stage to find Ryan when it happened. The microphone was still live. The audio system hadn't been cut between the formal presentation and the cocktail portion of the evening. A technical oversight. Nobody's fault. But the coverage radius of the speaker system meant that when Sabrina Cross picked up a nearby microphone to make what appeared to be a quick toast among a small group near the stage, her voice carried. It carried to every corner of that room. "Well," Sabrina said, holding her champagne glass up with a bright, ringing laugh, "I suppose we should welcome the company mascot, very dedicated, coming all the way out here at 7 months. Laughter. A small cluster of laughter from the people immediately around her. Olivia stopped walking. "She's very sweet, Ryan's wife," Sabrina continued, her voice carrying its particular brand of warm condescension. "Very devoted. Some women, you know, they marry the dream before the man gets there, and then they just sort of anchor in place. Hold on for dear life. You can't really blame them, can you? They worked hard to secure that future." Another laugh. "God bless the pregnancy. At least it guarantees a check." The laughter around her grew uncertain. Someone coughed. The room had gone very, very quiet. Olivia became aware that people near her had turned to look. She could feel eyes moving from Sabrina to her face. She could feel the heat of 400 people collectively wondering what she was going to do. She stood perfectly still. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Her baby kicked one solid, indignant movement, as if even the child understood that something deeply wrong had just occurred. Olivia pressed one hand briefly to her side and said nothing. She looked at Ryan. He was standing 20 feet away. He had heard it. She could tell from the way his jaw had set and his eyes had gone to the middle distance that practiced executive stillness that meant he was calculating rather than reacting. He was surrounded by 3 investors whose names she knew because she'd learned them the way a good wife learns everything that matters to her husband's career. He looked at her, and he said nothing. He simply said nothing. He turned slightly back toward the investor to his left and made a small gesture with his drink, and the conversation resumed, and he did not look at her again. And something inside Olivia Sterling, something that had been bending under pressure for a very long time, finally cleanly broke. Not with dramatics, not with a scene, nothing that would give Sabrina Cross the satisfaction of footage. Just a quiet, fundamental fracture deep inside her chest, in the place where she had kept all her faith in this man. She did not cry. She had decided years ago not to cry at events. She smiled instead, a small, pleasant smile aimed at no one, and she turned and walked toward the exit with the careful, measured steps of a woman who has absolute control of herself, even when everything inside her is falling apart. A woman named Patricia, the wife of one of Sterling's early investors, caught Olivia's arm near the door. Patricia was 60-something, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and had been in rooms like this long enough to understand exactly what had just happened. "Olivia," she said quietly, "you don't have to go." "I know," Olivia said. "Are you all right?" "I'm going to be," Olivia said. And she meant it. She didn't know yet exactly what shape that being all right would take, but she meant every word of it. She walked out of the Grand Hyatt, past the valets, past the cameras, into the warm Dallas night, and she stood on the sidewalk alone for a moment while the world moved around her cars, voices, the distant sound of music still drifting from inside the building. She called her driver. She rode home in silence. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Ryan for 6 years, and she looked at her own hands in her lap, one resting on top of her rounded belly, and she thought about all the moments she had explained away, all the late nights she had attributed to work, all the distance she had called stress, all the times she had chosen the kindest possible interpretation, because she loved him, and because she wanted to be the kind of woman who believed in her husband. She had been so proud of being that kind of woman. Now she sat in the dark, and she thought about Sabrina Cross's voice carrying across that silent room, and Ryan's jaw set in that executive stillness, and his eyes moving deliberately away from her. And she understood with the clarity of a woman who has finally run out of ways to misunderstand that she had spent years protecting a marriage that Ryan had quietly, methodically stopped protecting a long time ago. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed and felt her daughter move inside her, and she talked to her in a whisper the way she sometimes did when it was very late and very quiet, telling her things that weren't ready to be said out loud. She told her that she was loved. She told her that she was going to be protected. She told her that whatever happened next, she was going to have a mother who stood up. By 3 a.m, Olivia wasn't crying anymore. She was thinking. She got out of bed. She went to the small home office she used for personal matters, not the formal study Ryan used for company work, but the corner room she'd made her own over the years, with the bookshelves and the antique desk her father had given her. She opened the bottom drawer. She pulled out a filing box she hadn't opened in over a year. Her father's documents, or rather the copies she'd kept because Ryan had asked her years ago to let his legal team organize the originals for safekeeping. She hadn't thought much about that at the time. Now she did. She spread the first set of papers on the desk. Her father, Charles Whitaker, had been a careful man, a businessman who documented everything: meeting minutes, investment agreements, correspondence. Her father had believed that a man's word was only as trustworthy as the paper it was written on. She started reading. She read for a long time. The documents covered the early years of Sterling Aerospace, years before Olivia had even met Ryan, years when the company was nothing more than an ambitious startup bleeding cash trying to convince serious money that a 30-year-old pilot from a middle-class Texas family had what it took to reinvent private aviation. According to these documents, a significant portion of the bridge financing that kept Sterling Aerospace alive during its first critical crisis, the 18-month period that Ryan always described in interviews as the company's darkest chapter, had come from a private holding company, Whitaker Capital Partners, her father's company. She sat back in her chair. She thought about all the times Ryan had told the founding story of Sterling Aerospace in interviews, the scrappy visionary, the sleepless nights, the pure force of will. He always made it sound like he'd done it alone, him and a handful of believers. He never mentioned the Whitaker money, not once, not in a single interview she had ever read or watched. She pulled out another folder. Acquisition agreements, properties, percentages. Her head was beginning to hurt. She was 7 months pregnant, and it was 3:30 in the morning, and she was trying to parse financial documents that would have challenged her even under ideal conditions. But she could read well enough to see the dates. She could read well enough to see the amounts. She could read well enough to understand that the numbers in front of her were significant, deeply structurally significant, in a way that nobody had ever told her about. And then she found a document with her own signature on it, a signature she did not remember putting on anything like this. She stared at it for a long time. She pulled it closer to the light. The signature was hers. She'd recognize her own handwriting anywhere, but the date on the document was from 4 years ago, 6 months after her wedding. And the document itself appeared to be a transfer agreement, a formal relinquishment. Her hands were completely steady as she set it down. She was no longer sad. She was no longer heartbroken. Something entirely different had moved into the space where those feelings had been something quiet and focused and very, very alert. She went back to the bed. She sat on the edge. She picked up her phone and she stared at her contacts list for a full minute before she scrolled to the name she hadn't called in almost 4 years. Mason, her eldest brother. She thought about the last time she'd seen him in person. A family dinner before the wedding when he'd sat across from her and said with that measured, careful Mason voice, "Olivia, I need you to think very carefully about this man. I need you to be sure." And she had been angry. She'd been so angry because it felt like her family was refusing to believe in her choices, refusing to trust her judgment, refusing to accept that she was a grown woman who knew her own heart. She had been so sure she knew her own heart. Her thumb hovered over Mason's name. She pressed call. It rang 3 times. "Olivia!" Mason's voice came on immediately. No grogginess, no disorientation, as if he'd been awake, as if maybe he'd been waiting. "Mason," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "Are you safe?" He asked it immediately without preamble. Not "what's wrong" or "do you know what time it is?" Just, "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said. "I'm at home. She paused. "I found some documents, Mason. Dad's documents. I think—" She stopped. "I think I need help understanding them." The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Don't touch anything else tonight," Mason said. "Don't sign anything. Don't send anything. Don't talk to Ryan about this." "Mason." "Listen to me, Olivia." His voice had shifted into something she remembered from childhood. The same tone he used when something genuinely serious needed to be taken seriously. "I need you to trust me right now. I need you to go to sleep if you can, and in the morning I'm going to call you back, and I'm going to tell you what comes next. Can you do that?" She looked around the room, at the empty side of the bed, at her father's documents spread across the desk in the corner. "Yes," she said. "We're coming," Mason said. "Don't sign anything. Don't trust anyone. Just wait for us." The call ended. Olivia sat with the phone in her hands. Outside, the Dallas skyline was still lit against the dark sky. All those towers full of money and power and decisions she'd never been invited into. And she sat in the room her father's desk occupied, and she felt something shift inside her. Not just grief, not just anger, but something harder and cleaner than either one. She folded her hands over her belly. Her daughter kicked. "I know," Olivia said softly. "I know." She gathered the documents. She placed them carefully back in the filing box. She closed the drawer. She went to the bathroom. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. 7 months pregnant, red-eyed, exhausted, completely alone in this enormous house. And she said to her own reflection quietly and with absolute conviction, "You are not powerless." She went back to bed. She did not sleep, but she rested. And for the first time in a long time, she stopped making excuses for Ryan Sterling. She stopped trying to find the interpretation that let him off the hook. She lay in the dark, and she let herself simply know what she knew, all of it, the whole weight of it. And she discovered that knowing the truth, even a terrible truth, was easier to carry than the exhausting work of pretending she didn't. Down the hall, Ryan Sterling came home at 2 a.m. to a dark and silent house. He stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, looking at his wife, lying still in the dim light. He thought about what he should say. He thought about Sabrina's voice on that microphone. He thought about the investors who had awkwardly changed the subject and the board members who had exchanged glances, and how the whole thing had tilted the evening in a direction he hadn't wanted. He thought about the right words to say. He decided it could wait until morning. He was very good at deciding things could wait until morning. He went to the bathroom. He got into bed. He lay next to his wife in the dark and listened to her breathe and told himself that everything was manageable. Everything was fixable. He was Ryan Sterling, and he had built a billion-dollar company from nothing, and there was no situation in his life that he couldn't navigate. He had no idea that somewhere above the Atlantic Ocean, 3 men were already moving. He had no idea that in a filing box in the corner room of his own house, a truth he had worked very hard to keep buried was waiting quietly for daylight. He had no idea that the woman lying 3 feet away from him had already decided to stop waiting for him to do the right thing. He closed his eyes. He slept perfectly. The morning after the gala, Olivia woke up before the sun. Not because she'd slept and then woken. She hadn't slept at all. She'd simply been lying in the dark, eyes open, listening to the sound of her own breathing and the occasional movement of her daughter shifting inside her until the sky outside the window went from black to gray. And she decided that lying still was no longer something she was willing to do. Ryan's side of the bed was empty. She heard him downstairs. The particular sounds of a man who had decided the night before didn't require a conversation. The coffee machine, the low murmur of a news program, the practiced normalcy of a person who was very good at moving past things. She didn't go downstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed, both feet on the floor, and she thought about Mason's voice on the phone the night before. "We're coming. Don't sign anything. Don't trust anyone. Just wait for us." She turned those words over carefully. Mason wasn't a dramatic man. He was the opposite of dramatic. He was the brother who measured everything twice before he said it out loud. He was the brother who, when their father died, had held the entire family together through sheer controlled steadiness while the rest of them fell apart in different directions. When Mason said "we're coming," he meant it like a statement of fact, not a comfort, a fact. She heard Ryan's footsteps on the stairs. She didn't move. He appeared in the doorway, already dressed, already wearing the expression she recognized as his business face, composed, forward-looking, allergic to backward glances. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she said. He came into the room. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her, not touching, just close enough that the gesture could be interpreted as intimacy if she chose to interpret it that way. She noticed that he smelled like coffee and the same cologne he'd worn last night. She noticed that he had not yet looked her directly in the eye. "About last night," he started. "Ryan." She kept her voice completely level. "I don't want to talk about last night right now." He paused. She felt him recalibrate. She'd spent 6 years learning his recalibrations. He'd expected either tears or confrontation. He hadn't expected this particular quiet. It unsettled him, and she could tell, and she filed that information away without showing it on her face. "Okay," he said finally. "We can talk later." "Sure," she said. He kissed her forehead, a practiced gesture, warm enough to be read as loving, brief enough to require nothing from him, and then he was gone. She heard his footsteps going back down the stairs. She heard the front door. She heard his car. She waited until the sound of the engine completely disappeared. Then she got up, went to the corner room, opened the filing box, and went back to work. She was more systematic this morning. Last night had been shock and instinct grabbing at papers, trying to make sense of things at 3 in the morning with a hammering heart. This morning she brought a legal pad and a pen. She made columns, dates, amounts, names. She worked the way her father had taught her to work, when something complicated needed to be understood slowly, methodically, without letting emotion speed up her eyes faster than her brain could process. Charles Whitaker had been meticulous. Every document was dated. Every agreement had multiple copies. He had built the kind of paper trail that only a man who fundamentally distrusted verbal agreements would build. And right now, sitting at his desk with his papers spread in front of her, Olivia was deeply, painfully grateful for that distrust. The picture that emerged over the next 2 hours was not subtle. Whitaker Capital Partners had injected a significant amount of bridge financing into Sterling Aerospace during a period Ryan publicly described as the company's darkest chapter, the 18 months when the company nearly collapsed under the weight of its own ambitions. The record showed not one transaction, but a series of them, structured, carefully documented, thoroughly, the kind of financial lifeline that doesn't just stabilize a company, but shapes its entire trajectory. Without that money, Sterling Aerospace, as it existed today, the billion-dollar enterprise, the Sky Nova project, the gala, all of it would not exist. And Ryan had never mentioned it. Not in a press interview, not in a board presentation, not in a single conversation with Olivia over 6 years of marriage. She set down her pen. She picked up the document with her signature. She looked at it again in the morning light more carefully this time. The date was November 14th, 4 years ago. She and Ryan had been married for 6 months. She turned the pages slowly, reading the language with the careful attention she should have given it. She understood now when she'd apparently signed it. The document was a formal release, a relinquishment of claims, in language that was dense and technical and clearly designed to be difficult to parse quickly. It transferred her personal interest in certain Whitaker Capital assets to a holding company she had never heard of. She went very still. She turned back to the first page. The holding company's name. She wrote it on her legal pad. She stared at it. Then she opened the laptop on the desk and typed it into a search engine. The holding company traced back through 2 layers of corporate structure to Sterling Aerospace's primary real estate and infrastructure subsidiary. Her hands were completely steady. She was past the shaking stage. She was somewhere colder and clearer than shaking. Her phone rang. Mason. "Tell me what you found," he said without hello. She told him, all of it. She read from her legal pad in a clear, even voice the amounts, the dates, the holding company, the document with her signature, and she heard Mason listening on the other end, with that particular quality of silence that meant he was not surprised. "You already knew some of this," she said. It wasn't a question. A pause. "We suspected," Mason said. "After Dad died, Lucas started going through the company archives. There were gaps, things that should have been there that weren't. We didn't know how deep it went." "How deep does it go?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Olivia," Mason said, "I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. What I'm about to say, I'm not telling you to hurt you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth, and because you are going to need to be prepared. Just tell me, Mason." It wasn't just the bridge financing amount, he said. The property acquisitions in the 3rd year of the company, 3 of them, the ones that gave Sterling Aerospace its manufacturing base, those were funded through assets that came from Dad's estate, assets that were supposed to be held in trust for you and me and Lucas and Noah. The room was very quiet. "They were moved before the trust was fully formalized," Mason continued, "in the window between Dad's death and the legal completion of the estate process. Someone and we have a very good idea who identified that window and moved fast." "Someone inside the company," Olivia said. "Someone inside both companies," Mason said. "Someone who knew your family's financial structure well enough to know exactly where to look and exactly when to move." Olivia thought about Ryan's legal team. She thought about the executives she'd met at company events over the years, the polished, careful men who always smiled at her with that particular warmth that powerful people reserve for the wives of other powerful men. She thought about how thoroughly she had stayed in her lane, how thoroughly she had trusted that the people around her husband were trustworthy because he trusted them. "Mason," she said, "the document with my signature. I don't remember signing it." "I know. I would remember something like this. This isn't a form I would have skimmed and signed without reading." "I know, Olivia. So either my signature is forged or someone put it in front of you at a moment when you couldn't read it properly," Mason said quietly, "and we both know there were plenty of those moments in the months after Dad died." She closed her eyes. She thought about that period. The 6 months after her father's death, 6 months that also happened to be the first 6 months of her marriage. The grief had been enormous and disorienting. Ryan had been kind, genuinely warmly kind, in a way that now, sitting here with these documents in front of her, she was beginning to re-examine with entirely different eyes. He had handled so many things for her during that period. He had said so gently, Let me take care of this. You're exhausted. Just sign here, I'll explain everything when you're feeling better. She had been so grateful. She pressed her hand against her eyes for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay, what happens next? We land tomorrow morning, Mason said. The three of us. We have our legal team, and we have everything we've documented over the last 8 months. Olivia, I need you to understand, we're not coming to make a scene. We're coming to fix this, but we need you to hold steady until we get there. Can you do that? Yes, she said. Don't confront Ryan, not yet. Don't let him know what you found. Just be normal, be calm, and wait for us. Mason, she paused, how bad is it really? The silence was its own answer. It's significant, he said finally, but it's fixable. For you, for the family, it's fixable. That's what matters. She hung up. She sat with her hands in her lap. She thought about her father, about the way Charles Whitaker used to sit at this exact desk and work through problems with the patient, steady focus of a man who believed that every complicated situation had a solution as long as you were willing to be honest about the problem. She thought about how much she looked like him. She thought about how often people had told her that all her life, and how she'd always taken it as a simple compliment about their shared dark eyes and square jaw, never understanding that what they really meant was something deeper, a quality of character, an inheritance of resilience that went bone deep. She understood it now. Meanwhile, across Dallas, Sabrina Cross was having the best morning of her recent memory. She sat at the breakfast bar in her penthouse apartment, with her phone in her hand, scrolling through the social media coverage of last night's gala with the focused pleasure of someone who had worked very hard for a very specific outcome and was now watching it arrive precisely on schedule. The coverage was everywhere. Sterling Aerospace's launch was the story, yes, but running alongside it. On the gossip pages and the social commentary accounts, and the sharp-tongued finance blogs that loved nothing more than humanizing billionaires was a different story. A story about a moment at the gala. A story about a microphone and a very pregnant woman and the silence of her powerful husband. Sabrina read the commentary with a small, satisfied smile. Most of it was sympathetic to Olivia. She'd expected that. Sympathy for the pregnant wife was predictable and temporary. What mattered was the narrative taking shape underneath the sympathy, the narrative that Olivia was fragile, isolated, out of place. The narrative that Ryan Sterling's marriage was a technicality rather than a partnership. The narrative that Sabrina had been carefully constructing for 2 years, one calculated impression at a time. She poured more coffee. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "We need to talk today. Lunch." She smiled at the screen. She typed back, "I'll be there." She did not feel a single moment of doubt. That was the remarkable thing about Sabrina Cross, her absolute architectural confidence in her own position. She had surveyed the situation with the cool precision of an engineer, and she had concluded that she held all the important cards. Ryan was hers in every way that mattered. Olivia was 7 months pregnant and emotionally isolated and had no idea what was happening around her. The Whitaker family was a distant memory. 3 brothers who'd been frozen out years ago by the simple mechanics of geographic distance and family estrangement. Nobody was coming for Sabrina Cross. She had made certain of that. What she did not know, could not know, because she had never truly understood the family she'd worked so hard to dismiss, was that at that exact moment, at a private airfield outside of London, an $800 million jet was completing its final pre-departure checks, and 3 men were walking across the tarmac. Back at the Sterling house, Olivia came downstairs mid-morning, made herself breakfast with the deliberate care of a woman maintaining her physical stability for the sake of her child, and sat at the kitchen table with her father's documents arranged in a neat stack beside her plate. She was calmer now than she'd been in hours. Something about Mason's voice, about knowing that she was no longer alone in this, that the cavalry was not a metaphor, but 3 actual human beings currently in the process of moving toward her had reorganized her internal landscape. She was still angry. She was still hurt in ways she hadn't fully processed and wouldn't be able to fully process for a long time. But underneath the anger and the hurt, there was something else now, something she recognized as purpose. She knew what she was dealing with. She knew there was a path forward. She just had to hold steady for 1 more day. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. She did. The text read, "Olivia, My name is Patricia Graves. We met briefly last night. I was a close friend of your father's. I think we need to speak. I know some things that will matter to you. Please call me when you can." Olivia stared at the message. Patricia Graves, the woman who had caught her arm near the exit last night. She'd introduced herself simply as Patricia, wife of one of the early investors. But Olivia hadn't caught her last name in the noise of the evening. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" The response came immediately. "Your father gave it to me, years ago. He said if anything ever happened, if you ever needed someone who knew the whole story to call you. I've been waiting to know if this was the right time. I think it might be." Olivia read it twice. She dialed. Patricia Graves picked up on the first ring, and she spoke for the next 40 minutes in the measured, careful voice of a woman who had been holding a truth for a very long time and was finally carefully setting it down in the right hands. What Patricia told her reshaped everything. Charles Whitaker had known in the last year of his life that something was wrong with the financial arrangements surrounding Sterling Aerospace. He hadn't known the full extent. He hadn't been certain enough to confront anyone directly, but he'd been troubled enough to document everything obsessively, all those papers Olivia had spent the morning reading, and to confide in Patricia, whose husband had his own early history with Sterling. And there was more. "Your father told me something the last time I saw him," Patricia said. 3 months before he died. He said, "Patricia, I made a mistake. I trusted someone because my daughter loved him, and I wanted to believe her love was well placed. He said he was going to fix it. He died before he could." Olivia sat very still. "He also told me," Patricia continued more quietly now, "that the document he was most worried about, a transfer document, something he was told was a formality, was signed without him fully understanding its implications. He was shown it during a meeting that was rushed, and he trusted the lawyers in the room, and he signed it. He regretted it afterward. He kept trying to track down exactly what it meant." "What document?" Olivia asked, though she already felt the shape of the answer moving toward her. "A document that moved certain Whitaker Capital assets," Patricia said, "into a structure that benefited Sterling Aerospace considerably. Your father was told it was an investment structure, a partnership. He found out later it was closer to a transfer." "Did he know who arranged it?" The pause was long. "He had a name," Patricia said. "He wrote it down. He gave me a sealed envelope and told me to hold on to it. He said, 'Give it to Olivia if she ever needs it.' I've been carrying it for 3 years." Olivia closed her eyes. "I think she needs it now," Patricia said gently. "Don't you?" They arranged to meet that afternoon, a quiet place away from anyone connected to Sterling Aerospace, the kind of meeting that two women who had both learned to be careful could arrange without leaving a trail. Olivia got up from the kitchen table. She moved through the house with the focused energy of someone who has just received a map in the middle of territory she thought was uncharted. She was not panicking. She was planning. She showered and dressed and moved with the deliberate efficiency of a woman who understood that every hour now was meaningful. At noon, Ryan came home for lunch. He found her in the kitchen, calm, composed, the documents nowhere in sight, a simple meal on the table as if it were an ordinary Tuesday. He sat down. He looked at her across the table with the expression she'd seen many times in the last year, a careful expression, the expression of a man who is deciding how much sincerity to deploy. "I've been thinking about last night," he said. "Okay," she said. "What Sabrina said, that was completely out of line. I should have addressed it in the moment." He reached across the table. His hand covered hers. "I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at his hand on hers. She thought about everything she now knew was underneath this moment, all the hidden architecture of deception that had been built in the space around this marriage while she was busy loving him. She turned her hand over. She let him hold it for a moment. "Thank you for saying that," she said. She kept her voice warm. She kept her eyes steady. She gave him nothing that would make him cautious, nothing that would make him alert. He squeezed her hand. He looked relieved. He started talking about the Sky Nova launch, about the investor meeting scheduled for the rest of the week, about a trip to Washington he was planning in the next month. He talked about the future with the easy confidence of a man who believes the future is securely his. Olivia listened. She nodded in the right places. She asked a question or two that kept him comfortable. And while she sat there at her own kitchen table, holding her husband's hand and listening to him talk about his future, she thought about an envelope sitting in the possession of a woman who had been holding it for 3 years. She thought about Mason's voice on the phone. She thought about the sealed truth inside that envelope and the 3 brothers currently crossing an ocean toward her. Ryan kissed her cheek before he left. He told her not to stress. He told her everything was fine. She smiled. She said she knew. The door closed. Olivia sat very still for exactly 10 seconds. Then she picked up her keys. She met Patricia Graves at a small hotel lobby 2 miles from the house in a corner arrangement of chairs that was private without being conspicuous. Patricia was exactly as she'd been at the gala, gray-haired, sharp-eyed steady. She was carrying a small leather document holder. She set it on the low table between them without ceremony. "Before I give this to you," Patricia said, "I want you to know something about your father. He was not a naive man. He made one mistake. He trusted love when he should have verified papers, but he spent the rest of his life trying to correct it. This envelope is part of that correction." Olivia nodded. She could not quite speak. Patricia opened the document holder. She took out a sealed envelope, white, slightly yellowed at the edges, 3 years of waiting written into its careful sealing. She placed it in Olivia's hands. On the front, in her father's handwriting, "For Olivia. When she's ready." Olivia held it for a moment. She thought she might cry. She did not cry. She looked at the handwriting, her father's particular precise script, the handwriting she'd grown up seeing on birthday cards and report card notes and the margin comments of the books he'd lent her, and she breathed through the grief of it. And then she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a name, a date, a transaction number, and 3 sentences in her father's handwriting that explained exactly what had been done, how it had been done, and who had arranged it from inside Sterling Aerospace. She read it once. She read it again. The name at the center of it was not the name she'd expected. She looked up at Patricia. "He had help from inside the family," Patricia said quietly. "Not your family. Ryan's legal structure. Someone who'd been there from the very beginning." Olivia folded the paper carefully. She placed it back in the envelope. She placed the envelope inside her bag next to her phone, next to Mason's last text, which read, "We land at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't worry, we're almost there." She looked at Patricia across the table. "Thank you," Olivia said, "for keeping this, for waiting." "Your father loved you very much," Patricia said simply. "He just ran out of time." Olivia drove home in the long Dallas afternoon, the envelope in her bag, and the name on that paper turning in her mind, and she thought about the woman she had been the morning before, the woman who'd spent 3 weeks finding the right dress, who'd arrived at that gala, hoping her husband would look across the room and choose her first, who had stood in that ballroom and absorbed Sabrina Cross's cruelty and Ryan Sterling's silence and driven home to cry in the dark. That woman felt very far away. The woman driving home now had her father's voice in her ear, and her brothers an ocean away and closing fast, and a sealed truth in her bag that was about to change everything. She pulled into the driveway. She sat in the car for a moment. Her daughter moved inside her, a long, rolling movement, strong and purposeful. "Tomorrow," Olivia said quietly. "Tomorrow everything changes." She didn't sleep again that night, but this time it was different. The night before, sleeplessness had felt like drowning that slow, suffocating weight of a woman who has just discovered that the ground beneath her was never solid. Tonight was different. Tonight she lay awake with intention running through everything she knew, organizing it, preparing herself the way an athlete prepares before the most important competition of her life. Not panicking, sharpening. At 4:30 in the morning, her phone lit up. "Mason. We're on approach, 2 hours out, stay inside, don't answer the door to anyone from the company." She typed back immediately, "I'm ready." She got up, she showered. She dressed carefully, not in the way she used to dress for Ryan's events, not that anxious, pleasing kind of careful, but the way her father used to dress for meetings that mattered, simply, precisely, with the quiet authority of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. She went downstairs. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with her father's envelope in front of her, and she waited, and for the first time in days, the waiting didn't feel like helplessness. It felt like the last few seconds before a door opens. At 6:15 in the morning, Dallas Executive Airport received an unscheduled arrival notification. The controller on duty ran the registration and stopped. He ran it again. Then he called his supervisor. The aircraft was registered to Whitaker Global Holdings. Tail number filed flight plan, originating from London Luton, weight class landing requirements. All of it came through clean and legitimate and enormous. The supervisor came to the window. Word spread through the small operations staff, the way these things always spread quickly in fragments growing with each retelling. An $800 million private jet. Unscheduled. Dallas. 6 in the morning. Nobody knew yet what it meant. But everybody understood instinctively that something was arriving that would matter. The jet touched down at 6:22. It taxied to the private terminal with the unhurried, absolute confidence of something that has never had to rush because nothing in the world has ever been able to stop it. The ground crew moved to position. The door opened. Mason Whitaker came down the steps first. He was 42 years old and built like a man who had spent 2 decades making decisions that cost other people sleep while he slept perfectly fine. Not physically imposing medium height, lean silver threading through dark hair at the temples, but with a quality of stillness that made rooms adjust to him rather than the other way around. He wore a charcoal suit and carried nothing but a phone and the kind of expression that courtrooms take seriously. Lucas came next, 39 broader than Mason, with the quick eyes of someone who processes information faster than most people generate it. He was pulling a rolling briefcase, slim black, the kind that contains documents rather than clothes. He was already on a call speaking in a low, clipped voice that suggested the person on the other end was receiving instructions, not having a conversation. Noah was last, 35 the youngest, and in some ways the most dangerous of the three because he looked the most approachable. He had Olivia's eyes, their father's eyes, and a smile that could be genuinely warm or surgically precise, depending on which version of Noah Whitaker a situation required. This morning, it was the precise version. A company car was waiting. They didn't speak during the drive. They didn't need to. This had been planned for 8 months, every conversation, every document, every legal maneuver mapped and countermapped until the plan was solid enough to survive contact with whatever Ryan Sterling tried to throw at it. Mason texted Olivia. "We're in the car, heading to you first." Her response came in 4 seconds, "I'll be at the door." She was. When the car pulled up and Mason stepped out, she was standing in the open doorway of the house. Her house. The house that Ryan's money had bought and her silence had maintained, and she looked at her oldest brother across the morning light, and something in her face finally visibly cracked, not in a falling apart way, in the way that ice cracks in spring, which is not an ending but a thawing. Mason crossed the distance in 6 steps and put his arms around her carefully around the enormous reality of her pregnancy, and she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder and breathed. "I've got you," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you do." Lucas and Noah came in behind them. Noah put his hand briefly on the back of her head, a gesture so familiar it belonged to childhood, to scraped knees and bad dreams, to a family that had once known how to be close. Olivia pressed her lips together and nodded and straightened and became in that moment entirely herself again. "Show us what you found," Mason said. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Ryan had held her hand yesterday, and talked about his future, and Olivia laid out everything. The documents, the legal pad with her columns of dates and amounts, the transfer agreement with her signature, the letter from Patricia Graves, the envelope from her father, the name inside it, the transaction number, the 3 sentences that explain the mechanism of everything. Lucas went through the financial documents with the focused speed of a man who has done this many times before. He pulled out his own files, 8 months of parallel investigation, legal opinions, forensic accounting summaries, and began cross-referencing without looking up. Noah read the transfer agreement with her signature twice. Then he set it down and looked at Olivia directly. "Did you sign this?" "I don't remember signing it," she said. "I've thought about it for 2 days. I cannot place this document." "Could it be forged?" Noah asked. "It's her signature," Lucas said without looking up. "I've compared it to 6 verified samples. It's authentic, But the question isn't whether her hand signed it. The question is what state she was in when it was put in front of her. He finally looked up. You were 6 months into grief and 6 months into a marriage when this was dated. What was your cognitive state during that period? Olivia thought about it honestly. I was functioning but not at capacity. Ryan handled a lot of the paperwork during that time. He'd bring things to me and explain them in general terms, and I trusted him. She paused. I trusted him completely. The room was quiet for a moment. Not the painful kind of quiet. The kind that acknowledges truth without needing to editorialize. Okay, Mason said. Here's where we are. He laid it out cleanly. The Whitaker legal team, 4 attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, 1 former federal prosecutor, had spent the last 8 months building a case that documented the systematic movement of Whitaker family assets through a series of corporate structures into Sterling Aerospace's infrastructure holdings. The total value adjusted for current market conditions was significant. The kind of significant that changes board dynamics. The kind that comes with legal remedies. Mason had already prepared and filed in sealed court documents ready to be activated at the moment of his choosing. When? Olivia asked. This morning, Mason said. We're going to Sterling Aerospace headquarters. Today. She looked at him. Ryan doesn't know you're here yet. He will in about an hour, Mason said. Lucas, what's his schedule? Lucas already had it on his screen. Board pre-meeting at 9. Full board presentation at 10. Sky Nova post-launch investor debrief at 11. We'll be there at 9, Mason said. Noah was watching Olivia. How are you feeling about this? He asked, and he asked it the way he asked things directly, without softening it into a rhetorical question. He actually wanted to know. I'm not going to fall apart, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at her youngest brother. I'm angry, she said. I'm very, very angry, and I'm sad in a way I don't have language for yet. But I know what I want. I want the truth to be on the table. I want it to stop being hidden. Whatever happens after that, she paused, I'll deal with after that. Noah nodded. Good enough, he said. At 8:45 in the morning, Ryan Sterling was in his private office on the 14th floor of Sterling Aerospace headquarters, reviewing investor feedback from the gala when his assistant knocked and opened the door simultaneously, which she never did. Mr. Sterling, she said, and her voice had a quality he didn't recognize in it. There are 3 men in the lobby. They don't have an appointment. They say they're family. Ryan looked up from his desk. What family? Whitaker, she said. Mason Lucas and Noah Whitaker. They're asking to come up. Mr. Sterling? She hesitated. They came with a legal team, 5 people, and they're saying they'll wait as long as it takes. Ryan was very still for exactly 3 seconds. Send them up, he said. He said it calmly. He was proud of how calmly he said it. He set down the investor report. He straightened his desk. He picked up his phone and sent a fast text to his general counsel. Get to my office. Now. Don't call me back, just come. He stood up. He went to the window. He looked out over Dallas from 14 floors up, and he thought about what the presence of those 3 men meant, and he thought about Olivia sitting at home, and he thought about the documents he'd been so certain were buried deep enough to stay buried. For the first time in a long time, Ryan Sterling felt the floor shift beneath him. The elevator opened at 9:03. Mason walked out first. He didn't look around the lobby. He didn't look at the Sterling Aerospace logos or the aviation models or the framed magazine covers featuring Ryan's face. He looked straight down the corridor toward Ryan's office and walked toward it as if he'd been here 100 times before. Ryan was standing in the doorway of the conference room adjacent to his office, flanked by his general counsel and 2 executive vice presidents who had arrived in the last 10 minutes, wearing the slightly disheveled air of people who'd been pulled from other things urgently. Mason stopped in front of him. The 2 men looked at each other. Ryan extended his hand. Mason, this is... Save it, Mason said. Not loudly, not rudely. With the simple flat finality of a man who has decided that certain social rituals no longer apply to this situation. He walked past Ryan into the conference room. Lucas and Noah followed. The legal team arranged themselves along the far side of the table with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this before. Briefcases opened. Documents came out, organized in stacks, tabbed labeled. Ryan's counsel, a man named Gerald, leaned toward Ryan and murmured something. Ryan gave a small, tight shake of his head. He sat down across from Mason. "What is this?" Ryan asked. His voice was even. His executive mask was fully in place. "This," Mason said, "is 8 months of work." He placed a hand on the first stack of documents. "I'm going to walk you through it, and I want you to listen carefully, because when I'm done, you're going to have decisions to make, and the quality of those decisions is going to depend entirely on how honestly you've been listening." Ryan looked at the documents. He looked at Mason's face. He looked at Lucas, who was opening a laptop and connecting it to the room's display screen without asking permission, pulling up a financial structure diagram that filled the wall. "The bridge financing," Ryan said quietly. He said it the way a man says the thing he's been most afraid of hearing out loud. "The bridge financing," Mason confirmed. What came next was 40 minutes that Ryan Sterling would never fully describe to anyone afterward, not because he was protecting himself, though he was, but because the experience of sitting in your own boardroom while 3 men methodically disassemble the mythology of your company's founding is not something language handles well. Lucas walked through the financial trail with the calm, methodical precision of a surgeon. Every transaction, every transfer, every corporate layer that had been used to obscure the movement of Whitaker Capital into Sterling Aerospace's infrastructure. He put the numbers on the screen, and he put the corresponding legal documents on the table, and he connected them one to the next in a chain so clean and complete that Ryan's general counsel stopped murmuring objections after the first 15 minutes and simply started making notes. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Ryan's 2 executive vice presidents exchanged a look that they both immediately regretted because Mason caught it and filed it. Then Noah stood up. He was quieter than his brothers. He picked up a single folder, and he opened it, and he set 3 documents on the table in front of Ryan. "These are communications," Noah said. "Internal communications from inside your company spanning 18 months. We obtained them through legal discovery in a related proceeding." He let Ryan look at them for a moment. "I want to direct your attention to the dates, the recipients, and the subject lines." Ryan looked at the documents. His jaw tightened incrementally. "These communications document a deliberate strategy," Noah said, "to keep Olivia uninformed about the Whitaker family's financial relationship with this company. They show coordination between at least 2 members of your executive team and 1 external advisor." He paused. "The external advisor is named in your company's records as a strategic communications consultant." The name hung in the air without being spoken, but everyone in the room understood exactly who Noah was talking about. Ryan's general counsel said very carefully, "Where did these originate?" "Legal discovery," Noah said again. "Everything here is admissible." Ryan was looking at the documents with an expression that had moved past calculation into something raw. He was a man watching the story he'd told himself about his own life being corrected line by line in front of witnesses. "Ryan," Mason said. His voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of an adversary executing a strategy. It was something older and more tired than that. It was the voice of a man who had watched his sister's marriage from the outside for 6 years, watching and worrying and being kept at arm's length, and who now was finally in the same room as the truth. "My father trusted you. He trusted you because Olivia loved you. He invested in you when nobody else would. And he documented everything because he was a careful man, and then he died before he could fix the mistake he made in trusting the people around you." He stopped. Olivia didn't know. She still doesn't know the full extent. And she is 7 months pregnant, and she spent 2 nights alone in your house, reading her dead father's papers, trying to understand why her life felt like it was built on something hollow. The room was very quiet. Ryan closed his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. "How much?" he finally said. "Adjusted for current market value with appropriate interest and accounting for the infrastructure appreciation that Whitaker Capital enabled the legal team, has arrived at a number." Mason slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "That's what belongs to my family. That's what was taken, and we have the standing to pursue it in court through the SEC and through the board, and we will pursue all three simultaneously if that's the direction this goes." Ryan looked at the number on the paper. Something moved across his face, not just the financial calculation, but something beneath it, the dawning irreversible recognition of exactly how far things had gone and exactly how complicit his silence had made him. "What do you want?" he asked. "Right now," Mason said. "I want you to understand that the era of this being hidden is over. Whatever happens next, whether you choose to do this with some dignity or without it, that part is finished." At that exact moment, the conference room door opened. Sabrina Cross walked in. She was dressed impeccably. She had clearly been told by someone on Ryan's staff, someone who'd panicked and made a call they shouldn't have, that something was happening in the 14th floor conference room, and she had arrived with the composed authority of a woman who fully expected to be the most powerful person in any room she entered. She looked at the three Whitaker brothers. She looked at the documents covering the table. She looked at the financial diagram filling the wall screen. She smiled. "I'm sorry," she said pleasantly. "I didn't realize there was a meeting scheduled. Ryan, do you want me to—" "Sit down," Noah said. She turned to look at him. Her smile stayed. "Excuse me." "Sit down," Noah said again. And this time, the pleasantness in her own voice met something in his that had no give in it whatsoever. And for the first time since she'd walked through that door, something flickered in Sabrina Cross's expression that was not confidence. She looked at Ryan. Ryan said nothing. She sat down. Noah opened a second folder. He took out a different set of documents. He placed them on the table in front of Sabrina with the same unhurried precision he'd used for everything else. "These are yours," he said. She looked at them. The smile was still on her face, but it was working harder now. "I don't know what these—" "Page 3, Noah said. "Your messages to Ryan's communications director October through December 2 years ago. Page 7. Your coordination with the asset management firm that handled the transfer restructuring. Page 12. He paused, and his voice didn't change, didn't harden. Just continued with the same flat factual delivery. "Your personal notes, which were recovered during discovery where you describe your strategy for accelerating the, and I'm quoting your own words here, the removal of the pregnancy obstacle." The room stopped. Even Ryan looked up from the table. Sabrina's smile was gone. "The pregnancy obstacle," Noah repeated quietly. "That's how you describe my sister. 7 months pregnant. That's your language for her." The silence in that room was a different kind of silence from anything that had come before it. Ryan's 2 vice presidents were both looking at the table. His general counsel had stopped writing. Sabrina Cross was sitting very still, and for the first time in the 3 years that she had operated inside Sterling Aerospace's orbit, with absolute architectural confidence, she looked like someone who had just realized the building had no floor. Ryan was staring at her. "Sabrina," he said. Just her name. In a voice that contained something she had never heard from him before, not anger, not disappointment, but a kind of cold, final reckoning that is worse than either. "Ryan, these are taken out of context. Page 12, Noah said again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ryan picked up the document. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Sabrina Cross across the conference table, and something in his face went very still in the way that a person goes still when they are understanding fully and completely exactly what they have allowed themselves to be used for. "Get out," he said. "Ryan, get out of this room," he said. "Get out of this building. Don't contact anyone on my staff. Don't attend any company events. Your access to everything connected to this company is revoked as of right now." Sabrina stood up. Her composure was technically still intact. She was still dressed perfectly, still holding herself upright, still performing the posture of someone who has not just been destroyed in a conference room in front of 6 witnesses. But her eyes were different. Something behind them had gone out. She looked once more at Ryan. He didn't look back. She walked out. The door closed behind her. The room exhaled. Mason looked at Ryan across the table. Ryan was still staring at the documents. All of them the whole spread of 8 months of truth covering the surface of his own conference table. He looked like a man who had been handed a mirror and found it accurate. "My sister," Mason said, "is at home. She has been alone for 2 days with documents that told her things about her own life that she should never have had to discover alone." He paused. "She didn't come here today. She could have. She chose not to. That's who she is. It was always who she was. And you—" He stopped measuring his words with the precision of a man who has waited years to say them. "You chose not to see it." Ryan looked at Mason for a long moment. Then he did something that none of them had anticipated. He didn't deflect. He didn't calculate. He didn't reach for the executive mask. He said, "I know." 2 words. Carrying the weight of everything he hadn't said in 6 years. Carrying Sabrina's cruelty at the gala, and the silence that followed it, and the documents on this table and his wife alone in the dark reading her father's papers. Carrying all of it, the whole ugly architecture of his own choices in 2 words that were the most honest thing Ryan Sterling had said in a very long time. Mason held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked at his brothers. Lucas nodded once. Noah picked up his phone. He typed a single message to Olivia. "It's done. We have everything. You were right about all of it. Come home." Her response came in 7 seconds. "I am home. I've been home the whole time. Bring my brothers with you." Noah looked at the message for a moment. Then he showed it to Mason without a word. Mason read it. Something in his face shifted the executive stillness, giving way just briefly to the expression of an older brother who has spent years worrying about his youngest sister and has just received in 7 words confirmation that she is going to be all right. "Let's go," Mason said. He stood. Lucas and Noah stood. The legal team began organizing documents with the efficient choreography of people who had prepared for exactly this ending and were now executing it cleanly. Ryan remained seated. He looked at the documents on the table, the whole spread of his past, organized and labeled, and finally, irrevocably visible. He looked at the space where Sabrina had been sitting. He looked at the door through which Mason Whitaker had just walked out, heading back to a sister Ryan had failed, in ways he was only beginning to fully measure. Outside the 14th floor windows, Dallas was fully awake, moving at its ordinary pace, unaware that anything had shifted. But something had. Something fundamental and permanent had shifted in that conference room, and the reverberations were already moving outward through the building, toward the board, toward the legal filings sealed and ready in a court clerk's office, toward every corner of a company that had been built in part on foundations it had tried very hard to forget. Ryan Sterling sat alone at his conference table. For the first time in years, he had no idea what happened next. And somewhere across Dallas in the house with her father's desk and her daughter moving strong inside her, Olivia Sterling set down her phone, pressed both hands against her belly, and breathed. Noah's text had said, "Come home," but Olivia was already there, and she had been there in the truest sense for the first time in years. She sat at her father's desk in the corner room, and she waited, and the waiting this time had a different texture entirely. Not the passive, fading waiting of a woman hoping her husband would choose her. This was the waiting of a woman who had already made her choices and was simply allowing the consequences to arrive at their own pace. She heard the car pull up at 11:47 in the morning. She heard the front door. She heard Mason's voice in the hallway, then Lucas's, then Noah's, the particular acoustic signature of her 3 brothers in an enclosed space, something she hadn't experienced in almost 4 years, something that hit her somewhere below the ribcage with a force she hadn't anticipated. She stood up from the desk. She walked to the doorway of the corner room. Mason was already looking toward her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Olivia crossed the hallway and walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table, and her brothers followed, and it was the most natural movement in the world. 4 siblings around a table, the way they'd been 4 siblings around tables their entire lives, except that one of them was 7 months pregnant, and one of them had just dismantled a boardroom, and the table itself was in a house that had been built on lies. "Tell me everything," Olivia said. Mason told her. He told it straight, without softening the edges the way she had asked him her whole life to tell her things. The financial trail, the board's reaction, the documents Noah had placed in front of Sabrina. He told her about the communications about the phrase written in Sabrina's own handwriting, the pregnancy obstacle, and he watched his sister's face as she received it. Olivia's expression didn't collapse. It did something more complicated than that, a tightening around the jaw, a single long breath through the nose, the face of a woman who is filing something into a permanent category and deciding that the category is no longer worth her grief. "Say it out loud," Lucas said quietly. "Whatever you're feeling. You don't have to manage it in front of us." She looked at him. "I'm past the feeling part right now," she said. "I'll get to it later. Right now I want the facts." Noah leaned forward. "Sabrina's gone. Ryan pulled her access immediately. She walked out of that building and she won't walk back in." "That's Ryan's choice to make about his own company," Olivia said. "It doesn't fix anything for me." "No," Noah said. "It doesn't." "The documents," she said. "What happens with them legally?" Mason answered. The sealed filings were ready to be activated. The forensic accounting was complete. The legal team had identified 3 distinct remedies available to the Whitaker family: a civil claim for the asset transfers, a shareholder action challenging the concealment of material financial history, and a regulatory complaint that could trigger an SEC review of certain disclosures in Sterling Aerospace's growth period filings. "All 3 simultaneously?" she asked. "If necessary," Mason said. "We don't need all 3 to win. We need Ryan to understand that all 3 exist." "And does he understand that—" "Yes," Mason said simply. "He understands." Olivia was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. Then she looked up. "What did he say?" When it was over, what did he actually say? Mason looked at her for a moment. "He said, 'I know.'" She absorbed that. 2 words. She turned them over slowly, the way you turn something fragile over to check for cracks. She had spent 6 years with Ryan Sterling. She knew the full vocabulary of his avoidances, the deflections, the reframings, the gentle redirections that made it impossible to pin him to accountability. She knew what his excuses sounded like, and she knew what his genuine moments sounded like, and those 2 words she knew somehow, sitting at her kitchen table with her brothers around her and her daughter pressing steadily against her ribs, those 2 words were genuine. That was the most painful thing yet. Not the lies, not Sabrina, not the documents. The fact that somewhere inside Ryan Sterling was a man who knew, who had probably always known, and had chosen every single day to proceed anyway. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay." She filed it. She moved forward. "I want to be in the room," she said. Mason looked at her. "Olivia, I want to be in the room when the legal agreement is discussed," she said. "I am not a recipient of this settlement. I am not a beneficiary being protected from the adult conversation. This is my family's legacy, and I am sitting at that table." The 3 brothers exchanged a look. It lasted approximately 1 second. "Obviously," Lucas said. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon at Sterling Aerospace headquarters. Ryan's legal team had called Mason's at 12:30, asking for a same-day conversation. The speed of it told Mason everything Ryan wasn't going to fight. Whatever calculations Ryan was running, he had already arrived at the conclusion that fighting was not the right answer. At 1:45, the 4 Whitakers got into the car. Olivia sat in the back between Noah and Mason. Lucas was in the front reviewing documents on his tablet. Nobody talked much. They didn't need to. The particular silence of 4 people who grew up together and trust each other completely is not an empty silence. It's a full one loaded with shared history and the unspoken knowledge that whatever is waiting at the other end of this drive, they are facing it together. Olivia looked out the window at Dallas moving past. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 days ago standing in a hotel ballroom in a carefully chosen navy dress, hoping her husband would look across the room and find her first. She thought about Sabrina Cross's voice on that live microphone. She thought about Ryan's jaw setting in that executive stillness and his eyes moving deliberately away. She pressed her hand against her belly. She thought about her father at his desk, documenting everything, trusting that the truth he was recording would eventually matter to someone who needed it. It mattered. It had arrived. 3 years late, carried by a woman named Patricia, and activated by 3 brothers on an $800 million jet, but it had arrived. "Dad would have liked this," Noah said quietly, not looking at her, looking out his own window. "He would have been insufferable about it," she said. Noah laughed. Mason smiled without looking up from his phone. Lucas made a sound in the front seat that was definitely a suppressed laugh. And for one brief, real human moment, the four Whitaker siblings sat in a car in Dallas and were just siblings again, the way they used to be before grief and distance, and a marriage that pulled Olivia out of the family orbit had complicated everything. Then the car stopped. Sterling Aerospace Headquarters. They got out. Olivia straightened her jacket. She walked toward the entrance beside Mason, and she walked in the way she had decided that morning she was going to walk into every room for the rest of her life, not performing confidence, not displaying anything for anyone else's benefit, just moving with the quiet, complete authority of a woman who knows exactly where she stands. The lobby staff recognized her. Several of them looked startled, not at her presence exactly, but at the version of her presence. She had been in this building before. She had been the billionaire's wife, gracious and peripheral. The woman walking across the lobby right now was something different, and they could all feel it without being able to name it. They were shown up to the 32nd floor, the executive conference suite, not the 14th floor room where the morning's reckoning had taken place. This was the formal room, the room with the long mahogany table and the wall of glass overlooking the city, the room used for the most important meetings. Ryan was already there. He was standing when they came in, which Olivia registered as deliberate. Not the seated authority of a man holding his ground, but the standing posture of someone who has decided to receive what's coming without using his furniture as a shield. He looked at his wife when she walked in. Whatever he'd prepared himself to feel, it wasn't sufficient preparation. She could see that immediately. She could see the impact of her presence move across his face, the way weather moves fast and undeniable. "Olivia," he said. "Ryan," she said. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table in front of her, both of them steady. She looked at him directly and waited. He sat down across from her. The legal teams arranged themselves. Gerald Ryan's general counsel had brought 2 additional attorneys. Mason's team was already set up. Lucas had his laptop. The room organized itself into position with the quiet efficiency of professionals who understand that the emotional core of what is about to happen belongs to the people at the center of the table, not to them. Gerald cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the documentation provided this morning, and we'd like to—" "Gerald," Ryan said. Gerald stopped. Ryan looked at his own counsel for a moment. Then he looked at Mason. Then he looked at Olivia. "Before any of this starts," Ryan said, "I want to say something. Not for the record, not as part of the negotiation. Just—" He stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table, mirroring Olivia's posture, without appearing to realize he was doing it. "I want to say it directly." Mason glanced at Olivia. She gave the smallest nod. "Go ahead," Mason said. Ryan looked at Olivia and he said, "Your father believed in this company when no one else would. He believed in me because you believed in me, and I used that. I used his trust, and I used yours, and I told myself it was complicated, and that the arrangement was ultimately fair, and that the lawyers had handled it properly, and every single one of those things was a way of not saying what was actually true." He paused. "What was actually true is that I knew those assets were yours. I knew your family's money was inside this company, and I let people around me structure it in a way that kept you from knowing that, because knowing it would have complicated things for me." The room was very still. "That's not a legal statement," Gerald murmured. "Gerald, stop talking," Ryan said. He kept his eyes on Olivia. "I'm not going to fight this. I'm not going to let my lawyers argue about documentation windows or corporate structure or whether your signature constitutes informed consent. I'm telling you right now in this room that what belongs to your family will be returned to your family. All of it. Whatever number Mason's team has arrived at, we'll honor it." Lucas looked up from his laptop. He looked at Mason. Mason's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted the slight recalibration of a man who had prepared for a much longer battle and is now rapidly reassessing the terrain. "All of it," Mason said. It wasn't a question. He was confirming. "All of it," Ryan said. "There are also structural changes required," Mason said. "Acknowledgement in the company's official founding history, disclosure to the board, removal of the executives involved in the concealment." "Already in motion," Ryan said. "I made 3 calls this morning. 2 of those executives are on administrative leave pending formal review. Gerald is drafting the board disclosure." Gerald nodded without enthusiasm, the expression of a lawyer whose client has decided to do the right thing in a way that bypasses every protective instinct of his profession. Olivia had been listening to all of this with the particular quality of attention she'd developed over 2 days of reading documents and 3 days of holding herself together. She had listened to Ryan's statement. She had watched his face while he made it. She had run it through every filter she had: 6 years of marriage, 2 nights of truth, 36 hours of clarity, and she had arrived at a conclusion. She believed him. Not in the way she used to believe him, the wide-open, no conditions, this man is my whole world belief of a younger woman in love. This was different. This was the narrow, careful belief that a person extends when they have been hurt and are choosing to remain honest with themselves about what they're seeing. He meant what he said. She believed that. Whether it was enough was a different question entirely, and one she was not ready to answer in this room. She leaned forward. "Ryan," she said. He looked at her. "I didn't come here today to destroy you," she said. "I want you to hear that clearly. I'm not here to burn down what you built. Some of what you built is legitimate and it matters, and I'm not interested in punishing people whose only crime was working for you." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. The thing that hurt me most, it wasn't the money. It wasn't Sabrina." She stopped. She took one breath. "It was the silence. In that ballroom 3 nights ago. That woman said what she said, and you looked at me and you looked away, and in that moment I understood that I had been the only person in our marriage who was trying, for a long time, and I needed you to know that I know that." Anna. Ryan's jaw tightened. His eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen from him in years. "I know," he said, 3rd time. The same 2 words. But this time they carried something more, not just acknowledgement, but the specific, particular weight of a man who is understanding exactly what he lost and understanding it too late. "Good," Olivia said. She sat back. "Now let's finish this." The legal discussion lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes. Olivia sat at that table for all of it. She asked 4 questions, each of them precise, each of them demonstrating a level of financial and legal comprehension that made Ryan's general counsel blink twice and recalibrate his assumptions about who exactly he was dealing with. She had spent 3 days reading her father's documents. She had spent her whole life being her father's daughter. And Charles Whitaker had believed in raising children who understood how the world worked. She understood how the world worked. By 4:15, the framework of the agreement was complete. The numbers, the timeline, the board disclosures, the acknowledgement, the executive removals, all of it outlined, all of it agreed, all of it moving toward formal documentation that would be completed within the week. Gerald looked like a man who had aged slightly during the meeting, but was beginning to accept it. Ryan signed the framework agreement at 4:22. Lucas photographed every page. Mason looked at his watch. He looked at Olivia. "Ready?" "Almost," she said. She looked at Ryan one more time. He was still sitting at the table, still looking at her with that expression she didn't quite have a name for, not quite regret, not quite grief, something that was trying to be both and couldn't fully be either. "The baby," she said. "Whatever happens between us, whatever I decide, she deserves to know both sides of her family. She deserves to know the Whitakers, and she deserves to know you if you earn that." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm not closing that door, but you need to understand that I'm the one holding it now, not you." Ryan nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak, she could tell. He nodded. She stood up. The room stood with her, Mason, Lucas, Noah, the legal team, everyone moving in the smooth current that follows when the most important person in a space makes a decision and starts moving. She walked out of the 32nd floor conference suite. She walked past the lobby staff who tracked her with their eyes. She walked past the framed magazine covers featuring Ryan's face in the corridor. The profiles, the founding story told over and over in the press, with its careful omissions and its mythology intact. She didn't stop. She didn't look at any of them. She walked straight to the elevator, stepped in, felt the smooth drop of the descent, and emerged into the ground floor lobby. She walked out of Sterling Aerospace headquarters into the Dallas afternoon. The sun was lower now, that particular late afternoon angle that makes everything look slightly more golden and slightly more temporary than it actually is. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed the outside air and felt her daughter move a long, slow, rolling movement, strong and unhurried. Noah came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. Noah was good at not saying anything immediately. "How are you doing?" he finally asked. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a week." "Fair enough." Mason and Lucas came out behind them. The car was already waiting. They were almost at the car when Olivia's phone rang. Unknown number, Dallas area code. She answered it. "Mrs. Sterling," a woman's voice, professional, slightly tense. "This is Karen Walsh. I'm a producer at KDFW News. We've received information that a significant legal development occurred today at Sterling Aerospace. We'd like to give you the opportunity to comment before we run our story this evening. We go to air at 6. Olivia stopped walking. Her brother stopped behind her. She thought about Sabrina Cross at that gala microphone voice carrying across 400 people laughing about insurance policies and pregnancy mascots. She thought about silence, Ryan's silence that night, her own silence for years. She thought about her father's belief that a man's word was only as trustworthy as the paper it was written on. She thought about the paper that was now being signed and disclosed and made permanently, irrevocably visible. She thought about what her daughter would one day read about this story. "Ms. Walsh," Olivia said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried across the Dallas afternoon with complete composure. "I'll give you a statement." Mason turned to look at her. She held up one finger just one moment, and she said into the phone with the measured, unshakable authority of a woman who has found the full length of her own spine, "My family built something valuable. That value was obscured for years through arrangements that were not transparent. Today, that changes. The Whitaker family's contributions to Sterling Aerospace will be formally acknowledged legally and publicly. The right people will be held accountable, and going forward, the company's history will be told accurately." She paused. "That's my statement." A brief silence on the other end. Then, "And Sabrina Cross. There are reports that she was removed from the building this morning." "Ms. Cross's choices are her own to answer for," Olivia said. "I don't have anything to say about her." She hung up. She got into the car. Mason got in beside her. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Dad would have been insufferable about that too." She laughed, an actual real laugh, the first one in 4 days, and it sounded strange and necessary and completely genuine. The car pulled away from Sterling Aerospace headquarters and moved into Dallas traffic, 4 Whitakers heading home through the golden late afternoon light. In a penthouse apartment 2 miles away, Sabrina Cross sat very still with her phone in her hand, reading the same notifications that were proliferating across every financial and social feed in Dallas. Her access to Sterling Aerospace's internal systems had been cut at 10 that morning. Her contact at the company's communications department, the one she'd cultivated for 2 years, had stopped responding to her messages at noon. The 3 board members she'd considered friendly had each, in the last 2 hours, declined her calls. She had spent the afternoon making other calls, testing other connections, mapping the landscape of what remained available to her. The map was getting smaller very quickly. She set her phone down on the counter. She thought about Noah Whitaker's voice reading her own words back to her in that conference room, the pregnancy obstacle. She thought about the expression on Ryan's face when he read it. She thought about how thoroughly she had miscalculated the Whitaker family, how completely she had dismissed them as distant, estranged, emotionally motivated, and therefore manageable. She had managed a lot of things in her career. She had managed perceptions and narratives and relationships with the precise efficiency of someone who fundamentally believed that everything and everyone could be handled with enough intelligence and enough nerve. She had not managed this. She picked her phone back up. She had 3 calls to make her own lawyer her financial advisor, and the one remaining board connection who might still return her call. She would make them. She would be strategic. She would find the next angle, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done, and she was very good at it. But sitting in her apartment in the gathering Dallas evening for the first time in the 3 years of her carefully constructed campaign, Sabrina Cross felt something unfamiliar moving through her chest. It took her a moment to identify it, because she had not felt it in a very long time. It was the specific hollow weight of a woman who has been completely, finally, and publicly seen. Back at the Sterling house, Olivia sat at her father's desk one more time. She had sent her brothers to the guest rooms to rest. They'd been traveling for 30 hours, and the adrenaline of the day was beginning to wear off, even for Mason. She sat alone in the corner room with the filing box, and she put the documents back carefully in the order they'd come out, and she closed the drawer. She sat for a moment in the quiet. Her phone had been buzzing steadily since the KDFW call. People she knew, people from the company's orbit, people from the gala. Patricia Graves, 3 numbers she didn't recognize. She set it face down. She looked at her father's desk. The surface was clear now. Everything filed, everything documented, everything in its right place. She put both hands on her belly. Her daughter kicked one firm, deliberate movement, the way she'd been kicking for the last week, strong and purposeful, entirely herself already. "I know," Olivia said softly. "I know." She sat in the quiet for a long time. She thought about the woman Sabrina had described at the gala, the woman who married the dream before the man got there, who anchored in place and held on for dear life, who secured herself a future through a child and called it a marriage. She thought about who she actually was. She was Charles Whitaker's daughter. She was the sister of 3 men who had crossed an ocean without being asked. She was the woman who had sat alone in the dark for 2 nights and read the truth instead of hiding from it. She was the woman who had walked into a boardroom at 7 months pregnant and asked 4 precise legal questions and not moved from that table until the work was finished. She was the woman who was going to raise her daughter in the full knowledge of where she came from. Not just Ryan's world, that glossy, constructed world of aviation empires and event galas and executive decisions made behind closed doors, but the Whitaker world, her father's world, the world of builders who documented everything and trusted carefully, and when something was taken from them, moved quietly and completely to take it back. She stood up from the desk. She turned off the lamp. She walked out of this corner room, down the hall, and up the stairs to the bedroom that was still, for now, her bedroom in this house. She got into bed. Outside, Dallas pulsed with its ordinary evening energy traffic and voices, and the distant sound of the city being itself completely indifferent to the particular reckoning that had played out inside its borders today. Olivia lay in the dark. For the first time in 4 nights, she closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, her last thought before sleep was not about Ryan. It was not about Sabrina. It was not about documents or legal agreements or the precise choreography of accountability. Her last thought was simple and solid and entirely her own. Tomorrow she decided she was going to start building. She slept for 9 hours straight. When Olivia opened her eyes the next morning, the first thing she registered was the quality of the silence, not the heavy, suffocating silence of the last 4 nights, but something lighter and more deliberate, the silence of a house that had finally stopped pretending. She lay still for a moment, both hands resting on her belly, and she took stock of herself the way her father had taught her to take stock of things honestly, without dramatics, starting from the foundation and working up. She was still angry. That hadn't resolved overnight, and she didn't expect it to. But the anger had changed shape. It was no longer the frantic, disorienting anger of a woman who has just discovered she's been lied to. It had settled into something more purposeful, the kind of anger that doesn't destroy, but directs. The kind her father had carried when a business deal went wrong, that quiet, focused energy that he channeled straight into solving the problem rather than performing the grievance. She got up, she showered, she went downstairs. Mason was already at the kitchen table with coffee and his laptop. He looked up when she came in, and his eyes did a quick, unconscious assessment, the older brother scan, checking her face the way he'd been checking her face her entire life. "You slept," he said. "I slept," she confirmed. She poured coffee and sat across from him. Through the kitchen doorway, she could hear Lucas on a phone call in the hallway, something about the legal documentation timeline, his voice low and efficient. Noah was somewhere upstairs. The house felt different with her brothers in it, fuller, like a building that had been operating at reduced capacity, finally running on all its systems. "The board met this morning," Mason said. "Emergency session, 7 a.m. Gerald called our council at 8:15 with the summary." She looked at him. "And 2 executive vice presidents have been formally placed on leave pending internal review. The board voted to authorize an independent audit of the company's founding period financial history." He paused. They also voted to issue a formal statement acknowledging the Whitaker family's role in Sterling Aerospace's early development. That goes public today. Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. She sat with that for a moment. This was what she had wanted. This was exactly what she had wanted. And yet sitting here receiving it felt nothing like she'd imagined, not triumphant, not vindicated in the sharp, satisfying way that justice looks from the outside. It felt quieter than that, more like the specific exhaustion that comes after a very long effort finally reaches its end. Relief without celebration, because celebration requires distance, and she was still standing in the middle of everything. "How's Ryan handling the board session?" she asked. Mason was quiet for a beat. "Better than expected," he said, and his honesty was as always the most reliable thing about him. He's not fighting it. He got up in that room, and he told them directly that the historical record needed correction. Gerald told our counsel it was unexpected. She nodded slowly. Lucas appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Morning. The formal agreement documents are coming through. I need you to read them before you sign anything. All of them yourself, cover to cover." "Obviously," she said. "I'm serious, Olivia. Not because I don't trust our lawyers, because your father taught us that you always read what you sign yourself." "Lucas." She looked at him. "I know. I learned the same lesson you did. I just learned it 4 days ago instead of 20 years ago." Something in his face softened. He came in and sat down and poured himself coffee and said nothing more about it because there was nothing more to say. Noah came downstairs at 9. He sat at the table and ate toast and looked at his sister across the table with the same eyes she saw in her own mirror, their father's eyes, and he said, "What do you want to do today? Not what do you need to do. What do you want to do?" She thought about it. "I want to call Patricia Graves," she said. "I want to thank her properly. And then I want to sit somewhere quiet for a while and think about what comes next. The actual next, not the legal next, the life next." Noah nodded. "We can do that." She called Patricia at 9:30. Patricia picked up on the second ring with the warm, unruffled ease of a woman who had been expecting the call and was entirely at peace with whatever it brought. "I heard," Patricia said immediately. "It's all over the financial news this morning, the board statement, the acknowledgement." A pause. "Your father would be very satisfied right now." Olivia pressed her lips together for a moment. "I keep thinking about what you told me, that he said he made a mistake, that he trusted someone because I loved him." "Yes," Patricia said gently. "I've been sitting with that," Olivia said. "The idea that my love was used as a mechanism against my own father, that Ryan was able to access my family's trust specifically because of me." She stopped. "I don't know yet what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it today," Patricia said. "That's the thing nobody tells you about these situations. There's the legal resolution, and then there's the personal resolution, and they don't happen on the same timeline. The legal part can be over in a week. The personal part takes as long as it takes." "How long did it take you," Olivia asked, "when your family went through something like this?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. 3 years, she said. And one morning I realized it wasn't occupying the first thought in my head anymore. That's how you know. Not when you forgive, not when you forget, but when it stops being the first thing. Olivia thanked her. She meant it completely. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and thought about first thoughts and about the morning it would finally stop being this. At 10:15, Ryan called. She looked at his name on the screen for a full 5 seconds before she answered. "Olivia." His voice was careful, not the executive careful, something more personal than that, the careful of a man who is very aware of how little ground he's standing on. "I wanted to call before you saw the board statement go out. I wanted you to hear from me first." "Mason already told me," she said. "I know, I figured he had." A pause. "I wanted to say it anyway." "Okay," she said. "I'm listening." "The statement is going out at noon. It names your father specifically, Whitaker Capital Partners, the specific periods and the nature of the contribution." He stopped. "I wrote that part myself. Gerald drafted the corporate language, but I wrote the part about your father." She hadn't known that. She didn't show it in her voice. "What does it say?" It says that Charles Whittaker's faith in Sterling Aerospace during a critical period was foundational to the company's survival and growth, and that this contribution was insufficiently acknowledged in the company's public history. It says the record is being corrected now as a matter of integrity, not legal obligation. Another pause. And it says his name, his full name. It says Charles Raymond Whittaker, her father's middle name. Ryan knew her father's middle name because she had told it to him early in their relationship during one of those long nights when they used to tell each other everything. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you for that," she said. The silence between them was long and complicated, and carried 6 years of everything they'd been to each other, the real parts and the broken parts, and the space where trust used to be and wasn't anymore. "Olivia," he said, "I don't expect anything from this. I'm not telling you this I'm not trying to negotiate anything. I just need you to know that I understand what I did, and I understand what I cost you, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life pretending otherwise." She thought about what to say. She thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, the one with blueprints on the kitchen table, and a vision that could change the world, and the man who had looked away from her in a ballroom 3 nights ago, and how both of those men were real, and both of those men were him. And that was perhaps the most complicated thing about all of it. "I believe you," she said finally. "I believe that you mean that right now. Whether it holds, whether you can sustain it, that's what I need to see. Not in a meeting room, not in a legal agreement, in how you actually live going forward." "I understand," he said. "The baby," she said. "I need you to be her father, not a name on a document, a father. I need you to show up and be present and not disappear into the company every time fatherhood requires something uncomfortable from you." "I will be," he said. And then quieter, "I want to be." "Then we'll figure out the rest," she said. "One thing at a time." She hung up. She sat very still for a moment. Noah was in the doorway. He'd clearly been nearby but hadn't been listening, or had been listening, and had the grace to appear not to have been. He looked at her face and said nothing, just tilted his head slightly in the Whittaker family gesture that meant, "Are you okay?" She gave the Whittaker family gesture back that meant, "I'm getting there." At noon, the board statement went live. It ran on every major financial news feed within 11 minutes. By 12:30, it had been picked up by the general press. By 1 o'clock, it was the 3rd trending story on every business platform in the country, because the story had everything the billionaire founder, the public acknowledgement, the correction of a founding mythology that had been told in dozens of profiles and interviews over the course of a decade. Journalists who had written those profiles were already on the phone with their editors. People who had attended the gala 2 nights ago were already contextualizing what they'd witnessed in the new light of what they were reading. And running alongside the board statement on the social pages and the commentary feeds was a different story. The story of a woman who had stood at that gala and absorbed public humiliation in front of 400 people, and whose brothers had arrived the next morning in an $800 million jet, and who had sat in a boardroom 7 months pregnant and not moved until the work was done. That story ran faster than the financial one. Olivia didn't see most of it in real time. She had given her phone to Noah at 11:45 and told him to manage incoming calls, and she had gone for a slow walk around the neighborhood, just her and her daughter, and the Dallas afternoon, and the particular weightlessness that comes when you have put down something you've been carrying for a very long time. She walked for 40 minutes. She thought about her father. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the woman she was going to be. Not the woman she'd been inside this marriage, always adjusting, always interpreting generously, always making herself smaller to fit the available space, but the woman who had been there underneath all along, waiting for room. When she came back, Lucas met her at the door with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she said. "Sabrina Cross gave a statement," he said. She looked at him. "What kind of statement?" He handed her his phone. The statement was short. It had been released through a public relations firm, the kind that specializes in damage control, for people who have been caught doing things they'd rather not be caught doing. It acknowledged that certain communications attributed to her were real. It expressed what the PR language called regret for the impact of those communications. It did not admit to anything specific. It did not name Olivia directly. It was the carefully constructed minimum, the exact amount of acknowledgement required to appear cooperative while protecting as much as possible. Olivia read it twice. She handed the phone back to Lucas. "Is that enough?" Lucas asked, genuinely asking, not pushing her toward an answer. She thought about it. She thought about what enough meant. She thought about Sabrina Cross sitting in that conference room watching Noah read her own words back to her, the pregnancy obstacle, and the specific quality of that moment, the way it had laid something bare that no amount of PR language could fully recover. "For me," Olivia said, "yes, I don't need more from her. I need her to stay out of my life and out of my daughter's life and out of any space I occupy. The public record is what it is. People can read the documents themselves." Lucas nodded. "I'm not interested in her suffering," Olivia said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not interested in watching her fall apart or lose things or be punished in ways that go beyond what this situation requires. That's not what this was about." "What was it about?" Noah asked. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching his sister with the particular attention he gave to things he considered important. "It was about stopping being lied to," Olivia said. She'd said something close to this before in the boardroom in the legal meeting, but she was still finding the precise shape of it. "It was about my father's name being in the right place in the story. It was about my daughter being born into a true version of her history, not a managed one." She paused. "And it was about me finally understanding that I was never powerless. I just kept handing my power away and calling it love." The kitchen was quiet. Mason looked at her from across the table. "You sound like him," he said. He meant their father, and they all knew it. She smiled, a real one, unguarded. "Good," she said. 3 days later, the formal legal agreement was signed. The Whitaker family restoration was structured in 3 parts: an immediate financial transfer representing the principal value of the original Whitaker capital investment, with appropriate accrued return, a structured equity adjustment, providing the family with a legitimate ongoing interest in the company's infrastructure holdings, and a documented historical record that would be permanently incorporated into Sterling Aerospace's official corporate history. Olivia sat at the table when her copy was placed in front of her. She read every page. It took 40 minutes. The lawyers on both sides sat in a respectful, slightly impatient silence while she worked through it, and she did not hurry, and she did not apologize for the time it took. And she asked 2 clarifying questions about specific clause language that made Gerald look at her with the expression of a man who has spent a career underestimating people and is in the process of correcting that habit. She signed on the last page. She dated it in her father's preferred format month, written out in full, not abbreviated. She capped the pen and set it on the table and straightened the papers in front of her. Done. 2 weeks after the night of the gala, Olivia moved out of the Sterling house. Not dramatically, not as a performance. She moved because she needed her own space, a space that was unambiguously hers, that didn't carry the particular atmospheric weight of a marriage in the process of being honestly examined. She found a house in a quieter neighborhood, older and smaller and full of afternoon light, the kind of house that felt like it had been waiting to be a home rather than a statement. Mason helped her move. Lucas organized the logistics with his characteristic efficiency. Noah drove the box truck, which nobody had asked him to do, but which he did anyway because that was Noah. Ryan came to help. She'd told him he didn't have to. He came anyway. He carried boxes, and he didn't offer commentary on her choices, and he didn't perform grief or guilt in a way that made demands on her attention. And when everything was in the new house and they were standing in the empty living room of the place they'd shared, he looked around at the stripped walls and the moved furniture and said simply, "I hope it's good for you, the new place." "Thank you," she said. "I'm going to be better," he said. "I know you need to see it, not hear it, but I'm telling you anyway." "I know," she said. She walked him to the door. They stood for a moment on the threshold, the particular suspended moment of 2 people who have shared an enormous amount of life and are now carefully finding out what shape things will take on the other side. He looked at her belly, 8 months now, the baby pressing visibly, undeniably present. "She's going to be remarkable," he said. "She already is," Olivia said. He left. She closed the door. She stood alone in her new house for a moment. Really alone, brothers gone, Ryan gone quiet everywhere, and she waited to feel something catastrophic. The crash she'd been bracing for since the night of the gala, the full weight of everything landing at once. It didn't come. What came instead was something she hadn't expected: steadiness. The solid, unremarkable steadiness of a woman standing in her own house on her own terms, accountable to herself and to the daughter, almost ready to arrive, belonging entirely and only to the life she was choosing. She put her hand on her belly. Her daughter moved that long, strong, purposeful, rolling movement she'd come to know over these months as distinctly this child's way of making herself known. "This is ours," Olivia said quietly. "This one is just ours." 6 weeks later, Charlotte Whittaker Sterling was born. 6 pounds 11 ounces, dark hair, her grandfather's eyes that particular deep brown that all 4 Whittaker siblings shared, that went serious and watchful, and then suddenly, unexpectedly, warm. She arrived at 4:37 in the morning after 11 hours of labor, and she arrived loudly announcing herself to the room with the full-throated insistence of someone who had opinions about the world and intended to share them. Olivia held her daughter for the first time and felt something she had no adequate language for, not the romantic vision of maternal love she'd read about in books, but something rawer and more elemental than that, something that reached back through generations and forward through futures she couldn't see yet, connecting her to her father and his father and the long, complicated, resilient line of people she came from. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. "Charlotte," she said, "you come from Builders." Mason was in the waiting room. He came in first, and when he saw his niece, he became briefly completely un-Mason, his face open in a way that the boardroom version of him would not have recognized, his eyes bright, his composure entirely suspended in the face of something more important than composure. He held Charlotte for 4 minutes before Lucas took her, and Lucas held her and talked to her in a low voice, the way he talked to everyone he was trying to understand. And then Noah held her, and Noah, who had his sister's eyes and their father's steadiness, held his niece against his chest and went very still for a long moment. And when he looked up, his face said everything that couldn't be said out loud. Ryan came in the afternoon. He knocked before entering the particular knock of a man who understands he is a guest in a room that is not his by right. Olivia looked up from where she was sitting with Charlotte against her chest. Ryan stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter. He didn't move for a moment. He just looked at her, this small, specific, entirely new person, with an expression that stripped away every layer of executive armor and public persona and carefully managed presentation, and left only the face of a man who is looking at something irreversible and understanding, perhaps for the first time in his life, that some things cannot be negotiated or managed or corrected after the fact. Some things simply require you to be better than you were before they existed. "Can I?" he said. Olivia shifted Charlotte toward him. He took his daughter with the careful, concentrated attention of someone who is holding something they cannot afford to drop. Charlotte looked up at her father with the unfocused, searching gaze of a brand new person encountering the world, and Ryan looked down at his daughter, and something in his face broke open in a way that Olivia observed honestly and without judgment. She didn't know yet what their future looked like. She had made no decisions beyond the ones the present required: separate homes, honest co-parenting, a genuine attempt to rebuild trust in the only way trust can be rebuilt, which is slowly and through action and without guarantees. She had not closed the door, and she had not opened it all the way, and she was for the first time in her adult life comfortable with the uncertainty of that. She was not waiting for Ryan to complete her story. She was living her story and leaving room for what was true. 3 months after Charlotte was born, Whittaker Global Holdings announced a new initiative, the Whittaker Foundation for Emerging Builders, a grant program providing capital and mentorship to first-generation entrepreneurs who lacked the family networks and institutional connections that most startup founders take for granted. Named for Charles Raymond Whittaker, headquartered in Dallas, Olivia was on the founding board. The press asked her about it at the announcement event. A journalist she recognized from the financial beat, the same beat that had covered the Sterling Aerospace story, leaned forward with his recorder and said, "This feels personal. Is this personal?" Olivia looked at him directly. "My father believed that the most important thing you can build is something that outlasts you," she said. He believed in investing in people before the world understood why they were worth investing in. He did that for a company. I want to do that for people. She paused. And yes, it's personal. The best things always are. Charlotte was on her hip during the announcement alert and curious, watching the room with those dark Whitaker eyes. When the photographer asked for a photo, Olivia stood with her daughter and her 3 brothers arranged around her, and what the camera captured was not a woman standing in the aftermath of a crisis. What the camera captured was a woman standing at the beginning of something. 4 people who looked like strength, like continuity, like a family that had been tested by distance and loss and deliberate betrayal and had come back together, not intact, exactly. Nothing survives those things completely intact, but whole in the ways that counted. Whole in the ways that would hold. Later that evening after the event, after Charlotte was settled, and the brothers had gone back to their hotels, and the house was quiet, Olivia sat at her father's desk. She'd brought it to the new house, the first piece of furniture she'd claimed, the one thing she'd known from the beginning. She wasn't leaving behind, and she opened a new notebook. She picked up a pen. She wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then she wrote her daughter's name. Then below that she wrote the first line of the thing she had been carrying around in her chest since the morning she'd woken up in the dark of Ryan's house and found her father's papers. The truth about where you come from is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be known, completely, on your own terms, without anyone's permission. She set down the pen. She put her hand flat on the page she'd just written. Outside, Dallas was doing what it always did, moving building burning with that particular Texas ambition that has no ceiling and no apologies. And inside a house that was finally completely unreservedly her own, Olivia Whitaker Sterling sat at her father's desk with her daughter sleeping in the next room and her family's legacy restored and her own future open in every direction. She was 29 years old. She was a mother. She was a Whitaker. She was a woman who had walked through the full fire of being underestimated and had come out the other side knowing exactly who she was. Nobody would ever again need to tell her where she stood. She already knew.